are still intervening in the DRC for both security and economic purposes. Finally, the pressure that from this administration to have the M23 withdraw from Uvira early this year is a testament of the political leverage the US has had over the warring parties in this crisis. My second point, we must recognize the interconnection between different peace processes. The Washington processes address the bilateral crisis between DRC and Rwanda. At the same time, the Doha process has opened direct talks between the Congolese government and the M23. That is very important. It recognizes the existence of an internal dynamic of the Congolese conflict. However, the progress remains quite slow in the Doha process. Why? Because it depends on the dynamic on the Washington process. Kinshasa still hopes external pressure on Rwanda will change the military dynamic on the ground. At the same time, the M23 still calculates its military leverage based on the pressure that Washington will put on Rwanda to sustain the crisis on the ground. Meanwhile, the African Union is working to find a way to implement the various resolutions coming from Doha and Washington process. This fragmentation creates a unclear accountability from different parties, a lack of measurable milestone, and an intended marginalization of the AU, the organization which is very much best positioned to address the conflict on the ground because the conflict is happening in Africa. Third, I'd like to ask to broaden our focus in this conflict. While Rwanda's interference in Eastern DRC is real and must be stopped, there's no debate about that. However, Rwanda is not the primary driver of Congo instability. Stopping Rwanda alone does not solve the issue of proliferation of armed groups in DRC, being like the ADF. The ADF has been killing hundreds of people almost on a weekly basis, but almost unreported, or having the Codeco, the Red Tabara, or the Wazalendo de Mubondo at the outskirts of Kinshasa. It will not solve the profound governance failure, corruptions, and weak institutions which allow these groups to regenerate and this conflict to re-emerge after a few years. For more than 20 years, these weaknesses have been the real drivers of instability in the country. Until they are addressed properly, peace agreement will remain fragile. The instability in Eastern DRC has for years evolved beyond the conflict mineral paradigm. Today, it's driven by local disputes, struggle over customary authority, community self-defense, and deep governance failure. Resources often finance violence, but they are not its main causes. So the real question here is not only how to end this crisis, but how to prevent the next one to happen. Therefore, for the Washington Accord to have a lasting impact, U.S. policymakers must take the decisive next step. The U.S. should publicly and decisively support an African Union-led facility to Congolese dialogue. The goal here is not to engage the U.S. in an endless state-building process in the DRC. This is not the U.S. mission, but to use its considerable political leverage to champion a continental process that addresses the foundational crisis of governance, institution building, and national reconciliation in the DRC. This must include two non-negotiable elements: a meaningful inclusion of Congolese civil society. Chairman Smith have said that, and Rep. Jacobs also has mentioned that, particularly those coming from structural institutions like the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church to ensure societal buy-in into those processes. Second, a component of justice and accountability, which has been missing in every agreement that's been signed here in Washington. Peace without justice risks being seen as an elite deal, fueling resentment and future cycle of violence. In conclusion, the Washington Accord and the RIF provides a crucial foundation. But if we address only the M23 and cross-border issues with Rwanda, we will miss the deeper disease. The strategic partnership agreement and the RIF will not survive if Congo's internal fragility continues to undermine them. Partnership must be anchored in institutional and accountability, not in personalities or short-term politics. Finally, lasting stability requires rebuilding the Congolese state itself. By anchoring the Washington process within a supported AU-led comprehensive strategy, the U.S. can ensure its own long-term interest, bolster strategic partnership with the DRC, and help achieve a peace that is both just and durable. Thank you.
Pastor Paul on the cobalt issue. Hope is that if this agreement were to truly bear the fruit of real hope and we need to pass legislation like mine, which is pushing it out for some years. Becomes, if the cobalt stays in and the other minerals, coltrane and all the others, inside of Deer Congo or are processed by a nearby country that is not a human rights abuser like the Chinese nation, then we will have achieved much. And my hope is, and I said with President Tshisekedi, we have a number of us next week, that we want the wealth to stay inside of Deer Congo so that the people will benefit first and foremost. And that means the children, that means the families. I mean, the wealth is so extraordinary, and unfortunately, the people who want to steal it by force and by deception are ever present. So I hope is that will happen. My bill would provide a rebuttable presumption. Anything coming from China is inadmissible to the U.S. We know that the EV fleet that the Chinese are producing, which is now growing in numbers every single day, for instance, in the EU, is a huge moneymaker for Xi Jinping. So he wants that cobalt in the worst way. President Tshisekedi made it clear that he's trying to get a better deal, but I do believe that so long as China, which has no such thing as a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act like we do, you can count on them engaging in this very corrupt and mistaken way. The fact of the matter is that the people of Congo are suffering because of it. So I hope we can get our bill passed. I hope that the accord eclipses the reason to do it. But you're right. We want, and I don't speak to this, just as you did with the blood diamonds, make American consumers especially aware. When you buy a diamond, know what its source is. But when you go into one of Elon Musk's showrooms, you're buying one of his EVs, know what it is. Every time I see an EV on the road, every time, a lot of them in this area, I think, how many children and how many adults were victimized in order to procure that cobalt coming out of China. So if someone wants to drive an EV, that's God bless them, all to them, all the power to them. It's got to be a supply chain that is not tainted in the way this is to be. And your number you just gave us of 200,000 kids being hurt by China, I mean, that is just off the charts. Those kids aren't going to school, they're not getting good nutrition, and above all, they're being exploited by these people. So that's something we might want to speak to in terms of making American consumers aware, other consumers as well. We've reached out to Europeans, and they're looking at legislation in the House of Commons, and we've helped to make that happen, to do a bill similar to ours. Hopefully we share best practices. Let cobalt come out of DRC, let it be processed in a way that is absolutely appropriate. The second thing I just wanted to ask about the MONUSCO, the peacekeeping by that organization has been flawed over the decades, but it's still needed. I visited them under Ambassador Swing. Little kids were being exploited, forced into prostitution, especially being exploited, 12, 13-year-olds, by the peacekeepers. So I had 4 hearings. I went to Goma, visited with them, raised the issue profoundly and strongly I could think of it. And to his credit, Kofi Annan did a zero-tolerance policy for the blue helmets. 6 months later, at another hearing, I said it's zero compliance with the zero-tolerance policy. So we got to make sure that the peacekeepers, one, are very well vetted so that they're not engaging in sexual predatory activity, especially against children, but all people, all women especially. But also that they have they've been reauthorized. They were reauthorized, as we all know, in December. The troop strength is relatively significant. But I do remind myself that, MONUSCO has their fact sheets. 304 of their soldiers have died personally. So it's not without risk, but the rules of engagement have to be such, in my opinion, that they can help truly make the peace that were necessary. And so that comes down to leadership. I'm sorry to say that the South African nation has pulled its peacekeepers out. I think that was a very sad and tragic chain of events that has happened there by President of South Africa. They had about 700 plus peacekeepers out of 12,000 actually. So it's a loss. But with the right kind of direction, and I mean this, the right kind of leadership, the peacekeepers can really make a difference. We've seen it in other places. Tony and I have seen it in Sudan. We saw it in South Sudan, where the peacekeepers had less than robust rules of engagement, and things happen like they did in those. As some openings, I just remind everybody that 70% of the world's cobalt reserves come from the DRC. Some say the number is higher. So again, it can produce great wealth. All accrue to the people of the DRC. And again, on Rwanda, we have called, and if you look at the reauthorization of peacekeeping, they really call on Rwanda to do more of their forces to step back and stop aiding and abetting the groups. It's just got to stop. I mean, to use rape as a weapon, you mentioned Ethiopia, I worked with you on that, you took the real man, Tony, Pastor Paul, and I remember we realized that in Gitsu was using food as a weapon. One of the worst and most well-documented atrocities, food was used as a weapon to track people that they were killed. And how many people died? So, we're educating